This video is a remake of the first Games D video, Why Crash Works. The reason for remaking it isn't to replace the original. Rather, this was a creative exercise to see how much I've improved as a writer and video maker in the nearly 4 years since it was released. For sake of preservation, the original will still be made available on my channel, and is linked in the description below. If you'd be interested in seeing me remaster older videos like this again, with improved narration and amended information, then consider supporting me on Patreon, where one of my tiers is dedicated to the production of director's commentaries and remasters of older work. With this prologue out of the way, please enjoy the following video. In the mid-1990s, video games were on the verge of a 3D era, and the platform game was at its peak. Super Mario and Sonic the Hedgehog were decorated heroes of the console war, having won audiences to their respective systems with fabulous games and undeniable marketing power. The two would make the leap to this new third dimension, with Nintendo's game creating a new era of open world games. But a new challenger was ready to enter the fray, built from the ground up for 3D. He wasn't a portly everyman, or too cool for school, but rather he was an Australian marsupial with an appetite for destruction. Crash Bandicoot is fondly remembered by many because he was there at the release of the original PlayStation. As a familiar platforming mascot, he'd be for many gamers their first taste of this new polygonal frontier. A branding juggernaut on par with Mario and Sonic, he would give Sony the identity it needed to thrive against the competition. Without Crash, it's unlikely they'd be the video game superpower they are today. Unfortunately, Crash's importance would diminish beyond the PlayStation. Titles like Resident Evil, Tekken, Gran Turismo, Metal Gear Solid, and Final Fantasy VII are the games that are considered the PlayStation's greatest accomplishments. Crash, on the other hand, was just a platform mascot, and when he wasn't so directly linked to the PlayStation, many fell out of love with his antics. He lost direction, and eventually faded into obscurity. Yet, a PS4 exclusive remake of the first 3 Crash Bandicoot games is set to release in 2017. But it's been 21 years since the release of Crash Bandicoot in 1996. The graphics will be redone, but the gameplay will be left as it was in the days before the DualShock. The question is its underlying game design any good? More so, if the remake is a success, is it good enough for Crash Bandicoot to come back? My answer to both questions is a resounding yes. I'm James D, and I'm going to explain why Crash works. Developed by Naughty Dog, Crash Bandicoot was the earliest success story for the studio who'd go on to greater acclaim with titles like Uncharted and The Last of Us. It's here where they managed to hone their greatest skills. Gorgeous graphics, amazing animation, and gameplay that is focused on pushing you through eye-popping set pieces. Even on the humble PlayStation, they showed great aptitude for creating a playable cartoon, where Crash runs, jumps and dies with a level of expression missing from his other polygonal peers. But to create a cartoon that's as fun to play as it is to look at, you need to put in the work. Fortunately, Naughty Dog were very much up to the challenge. Like all great platforming games, Crash Bandicoot is all about momentum. In a platform game, momentum is the conservation of movement from the starting point to the finish. In a Sonic the Hedgehog game, you do this by building and maintaining speed, so that you can complete a labyrinthian level in the shortest time possible. For Super Mario, it's about conserving speed while solving a creative obstacle course within the allotted time limit. Crash Bandicoot is somewhere in the middle. You're pushed towards a goal off in the distance, and in between are your requisite enemies and bottomless pits. There are no time limits in place urging you forward, and a life system is what decides how many chances you get to start from a checkpoint. Your movement kit is designed for getting Crash up to speed. As well as a jump, you also have Crash's signature spin. For an early 3D game, giving players a means to deal with enemies without requiring a tricky jump is welcome. Even better, the spin doesn't bring Crash to a halt, allowing him to maintain momentum through obstacles. In the second game onwards, Naughty Dog introduced a modifier button, with mixed success. On the negative end, it's used for belly flops that unfortunately bring Crash to an awkward halt, but it's also used for slides and high jumps that allow you to deal with obstacles without coming to a stop. What it means is that you're in charge of how fast Crash can go, either taking things slow and steady to deal with trickier platforms, or blast forward at top speed. These three distinct means to deal with a challenge adds a lot more variety to the usual enemies and obstacles, and almost turns Crash into a rhythm game, where you either have to slide, spin, or jump to keep pace. An infinite runner this isn't, although some levels do take acceleration out of your control. Warthog, Polar Bear and Tiger levels send you careening forward, and they're exciting set pieces that challenge your reaction time and coordination. But completing an obstacle course as normal is only the surface thrill of Crash Bandicoot. From the very first game, there is a challenge waiting for players who will go out of their way to destroy every crate in a level without losing a life. Your prize for completing that task is a gemstone that adds points to your final total. Some of these gemstones have even more obscure conditions to unlock them. Perhaps you'll need to go through a level without touching any crates, or you need to beat a section under par. For those rare gems, your prize could be a brand new level, or a means to explore extra dimensions of a previously completed level. Like Super Mario World Secret Exits, it gets you into a mindset for exploration, and squeezes more juice out of otherwise linear levels. The result being more challenging levels awaiting those players who are willing to comb for every secret. Then, what crosses over these two styles of gameplay is something introduced in the third Crash Bandicoot game: time trials. Once you have completed a level, you're then challenged to beat it again under par. A fun wrinkle to this task that fits within the gameplay of Crash Bandicoot are yellow crates that can pause the clock for seconds at a time, but only if you can destroy them. In order to get the best times, not only do you have to play fast, but also aggressively, going out of your way to break these time-saving crates to get the best possible results. An upgrade in Crash Bandicoot 3 gives the main man the ability to run, which, at the cost of finer control, makes getting those higher grade relics more approachable. In conclusion, Crash Bandicoot gets the fundamental elements of the platforming game right. But that's not exactly what separates the best from the rest. So to do that, we need to get into a contentious topic regarding the original trilogy. Linearity is what's considered Crash Bandicoot's folly, especially when compared to the open world thrills of Super Mario 64. Yet, that linearity is a benefit because it puts level control very much in the hands of the designers. Take for example one of Crash Bandicoot's signature levels, Boulder Dash. You're still expected to destroy crates and avoid traps, but there's an additional wrinkle added to the proceedings, an enormous rolling rock that constantly chases after Crash. In order to really put this problem in perspective, the camera is locked to Crash's front side, and the level is designed extending in front of him. While this level could be playable with a free camera, it wouldn't work as the developers intended. It's memorable because you see Crash Bandicoot's stressed out animations, this enormous rock constantly catching up behind him, and because you can't anticipate obstacles in front of you too early. All of these elements are in step with the tone the developers want to elicit: high anxiety, but with a comical bent. The criticism of linearity was also used against Uncharted, but it's in that game where you see an evolved version of what Naughty Dog were doing back in the mid-90s. By taking a little control out of the player's hands, you can handcraft scenarios and set pieces with a specific tone in mind, something not possible in games where players have full control. Platform games are, after all about maintaining momentum, something that you can't do in an open world game without heavy restrictions on the player. Crash Bandicoot embraces those restrictions, and the benefit is a game that can keep playing with its momentum. It also means ideas can and will develop in later levels. Crash Bandicoot 2 is a good example of this, where it will have a polar bear riding section, a boulder chase, and then the two ideas combined as you ride a polar bear away from an even bigger polar bear. Perhaps the only place where momentum is unfortunately lost in the Crash Bandicoot trilogy is the rare vehicle section, Crash was becoming a marketing powerhouse, and so the want to put him in cool situations creeped into his later releases. Some of these work pretty well. Motorcycle and jet ski sections don't require you to relearn controls, but rather throw a wrinkle in like choppy terrain or a racing element. However, things like the jetpack or biplane sections require you to learn a new control scheme, slowing these already slow sections down. Ultimately, they are few and far between, and do serve their purpose of giving Crash Bandicoot a cool aside from the main gameplay. Perhaps the closest game to the original Crash Bandicoot trilogy's design might be the original DKC trilogy. Both games were lauded for their ahead-of-the-curve graphical fidelity, set in lush tropical environments that shifted into industrial zones. Both have main characters that can build momentum with their horizontal attacks, and are ultimately about maintaining pace through trickier platforming sections. They also have auto-running vehicle sections which up the challenge further. But consider this. Donkey Kong Country is the way it is because of restrictions. Because of the way the graphics are created, it can only be a 2D game. The same goes for Crash Bandicoot, which, although it is a 3D game, it's at its best when the camera is locked down to one orthographic view. Again, when it came to creating a playable Hollywood action movie with Uncharted, that camera in control of the designers could create set pieces that hit the right notes. Something that other innovators in the third-person shooter genre hadn't quite figured out. All of this is to say that Crash Bandicoot can still thrill today. Although its graphics are a little more polygonal compared to newer games, its gameplay remains sharp. It's challenging, not because of old controls and unfair camera placement, but through smart level design and those extra obstacles waiting for those going for 100% completion. In an era where the open world genre developed into GTA, which prides sandbox over set piece, it can actually be rather refreshing to return to a game that is so confident in what it's setting out to do. Like said, Crash could be the backbone for a future third-person shooter series from the same developer. In that case, does Uncharted set the template for where the Crash Bandicoot franchise should evolve? I don't think so. Rather, there's an entire series out there that evolves on the original Crash Bandicoot trilogy. And surprisingly, it's one starring a character who, at the time of Crash's release, had rewritten the 3D platform genre. Super Mario 3D Land and 3D World are what happens when Nintendo applies the design of its 2D platform games into a 3D space. However, this didn't come as an unexpected fork in Mario's 3D evolution. Following the success of 64 into the more middling Sunshine, Nintendo decided to try crafting an open world game with a more directed structure. This ultimately led to the creation of Super Mario Galaxy, which could be described as a 2D obstacle course where said obstacles are little 3D worlds. It has the benefit of a 3D game where players have multiple approaches to solve problems, but by making it more linear, it could have tailor-made levels with build-up, big set-piece moments and calm, effectively putting momentum control once again in the hands of Nintendo's designers. Stuff like a level where every time you jump, platforms appear and disappear could work in an open-world game, but they work best when they're the only way a player can progress towards a goal. 3D Land boiled these ideas down into something where Mario was mechanically at his simplest, so that the levels could be at their most sophisticated. They're 3D dioramas with lots of moving parts, introducing new ideas every level, and building on those ideas as players overcome them. 3D World would then add the wrinkle of multiplayer, where in order to solve the trickiest challenges and reap the greatest rewards, you needed to think like a team. How exactly could these elements be applied to Crash Bandicoot? Well, like its gemstone challenges, Mario Galaxy and 3D Land had its own share of additional challenges after level completion. Time trials and one-hit kill mode seem lifted almost directly from the Crash series. But then there's challenges like the Cosmic Clones, which create trails of toxic Marios that matches every move, only a few seconds behind. They're a little like the boulders from Crash, but they can follow Mario off a locked path, and through tricky platforms. And then there's the purple coin challenges that ask Mario to collect 100, either under a strict time limit or over the course of a challenging scavenger hunt. The Wumpa Fruit of Crash Bandicoot could be a good way to achieve this, giving them additional value outside of granting Crash another life. Levels too could be made a lot more abstract. Crash is a cartoon take on an ultimately real-world setting, while Super Mario games have started to dip more into their immediate artifice to have more interesting platforming. Stuff like floating conveyor belts, and switches that change whenever Mario jumps. Crash wouldn't need to break too much from format to have these kind of elements, so it should, with whatever the next game is. Finally, 3D World shows that cooperative multiplayer can work in a momentum-driven platform game, so perhaps his next adventure should have him and his sister working together simultaneously to solve these challenges. It's very easy to say that Crash Bandicoot is only popular because of his early allegiances with the PlayStation, but really it's the other way round. If Crash Bandicoot was another Bubsy the Bobcat or Gex the Gecko, it's unlikely that Sony would have found its footing with an audience already spoiled by Sonic and Mario. Looking good sold magazines, but playability sold consoles, and even without modern quality of life features and graphical fidelity, the original Crash Bandicoot trilogy is still a great outing. Arguably, it took till the second game for the series to really come into its own, but even from its first outing, it established itself as something special. By honing in on what made the 2D era platformers great, and marrying it with the spectacle this new 3D era could achieve, Crash Bandicoot became a mascot on par with his contemporaries. With this new remastered trilogy on the way, there's hope that people who may have forgotten how great these games are will be given a welcome reminder. Then, by taking lessons from his contemporaries, new developers can create new Crash Bandicoot games that build on the successes of the trilogy. But it'll be some time before we see that. And with the remastered trilogy still some ways off, it might be a great time to blow the dust off a PS1 and take a nostalgic vacation back to N Sanity Island.